With just a few episodes of The Conners to go, we continue some of the threads started in the first episode of this season that really didn't get brought up last week. Let's talk about applications, accusations, and a man bag. Hey guys, Dan here. This is Dan Reviews It. Welcome to my Connors review for episode 3 of the final season of the show, season 7. There's only 3 left after this episode, so it's nice that we brought back some of the themes and plot lines that were started in episode 1 of this season that didn't get touched on at all last week, including the stuff with Mark and Jackie wanting to become a cop, and then some of the stuff that got brought up in the last episode doesn't rear its head here at all, including the stuff with Seth Green. But in any event, we will talk about this all and break it down for you here. Before we do that, though, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you are a subscriber already for Dan Reviews It, thank you so much for that. Love it when you guys return and check out my stuff. But if you're not, please consider subscribing and click that notification bell to get the alerts for all my new drops. I don't just do Connor stuff on the channel here. Lots of movie and TV reviews, and I try to post something just about every day. So there's always a lot going on here, a lot of TV stuff if you are more in that zone, which you might be if you're watching my Connors videos. But all right, so and of course, comment below. I love talking with you guys in the comment section about this show. So, all right, this was directed once again by Jody Margolin Hahn. I mentioned last week that she is in charge of directing all 6 of these final episodes, so no surprise there. And this was written by Shelley Dennis. She gets the credit for this one, and she's written a handful of the episodes. Last season, she wrote the one where the family finds out that Grandma Bev is looking into her credit card fraud. And that was one of the first episodes with Sean Astin as well as Tyler. And then she also wrote one of the episodes where Louise was working on her school board campaign. And one of you guys in the comments last week had mentioned, like, hey, whatever happened with that? I don't know. That's such a good question. Maybe it was just to give the Louise character something to do outside the family, even though it was sort of spurred on by something with Beverly Rose, but outside of Dan and the family, I don't know. And then I guess she won, right? And then nothing ever happened with it after that. Look, they can't wrap up everything with just 6 episodes to go, I suppose. And Louise wasn't even in this one. Katie Seagal not present. So far, I think she's just been in the first episode for this season. Speaking of people not being here, J.R. Ferguson absent again. That's become a plot point unto itself this season, that Ben is working at the hardware store, or the hardware magazine, I should say, and sleeping there, so he's not really around, and that kind of led us into the Seth Green plotline from last week. So he is absent again, and Harris is not here either. But Ben is back. We dive into more of his plot from the season premiere, and Jackie is talking once again about being a cop. We have the return of Zoe Perry, her real life daughter, as the cop that she sort of looks to kind of. She must be the only cop in the town, because she found her at the bar, and then she also Zoe Perry's character came to the lunchbox to eat. So I don't know. They're really pushing the idea of a cop shortage, and that's why they're looking to some of the retirees to get back on the force. But let's start there anyway, because I guess that's the first part of the plot, the applications part. So there's a classic Connor poker game at the beginning of the episode. Neville is there. We haven't seen him yet this season, Nat Faxon's character, and Jackie's husband. So she comes in and starts talking about, hey, what do you think of this? I want to be a cop. She hasn't mentioned this to anybody in the family yet. In episode 1 of the season, she just brought it up to the Zoe Perry character. And so everybody in the family's, got sort of the same idea here. This is, kind of silly. You're way too old for this. Oh, you mean a desk job, right? No, I want to be out in the field. Okay. And what's his name? Neville. Nat Faxon's the actor, but Neville is basically like, well, everybody else in the family's like, this is a crazy idea. You're being silly. He is more like, I don't want you to do this. Like, you're my wife. I don't want to fear every day that something's going to happen to you, especially, at your age. And this and that. And I had a comment last week, by the way, in the comment section about, oh, there's no way, that Jackie's in her 70s. I made a comment that she was in her 70s. And Laurie Metcalf, the actress, is 69. So I think the Jackie character is right around that age. So imagine your 70-year-old, for me, it would be my mother, who's in her 70s, but, maybe your grandmother or whatever, um, going back to work in that type of a career. I don't think I'd love the idea either, to be completely honest. It's funny because, we've known this family here for so long. It doesn't necessarily seem like Jackie is pushing 70, right? Because we knew her so much, in her 30s and 40s in the original series. And she certainly doesn't look like she's about to be 70. So, to me, that didn't necessarily occur to me instantly that, oh, this is going to be super dangerous for her, even though they kind of poked fun a little bit about that in the premiere. But I don't know. I mean, I certainly respect that she wants to do that, but keep in mind, she was discharged from the police because her firearm discharged and hit her in the leg. She was only on the force for, I don't know, a year and a half of the original series. She had many, many jobs, trucker, and of course, then they opened the lunchbox and whatever. So, I don't know. She certainly would have to get all the training again, I would think. I mean, if she's been on the force, off the force for 35, almost 40 years. No, 30, we'll say 30 years, let's say, because it was probably the early 90s that plot point was happening. So, but still, she would have to get all the training again, and maybe she won't be able to do it. Maybe she will. I don't know. But in the end, she had the Zoe Perry character come to the lunchbox so she could talk to her more about it and say, "Hey, can you talk my husband into this?" She, of course, does not, because she doesn't want Jackie on the force. So that sort of is a bust. I love seeing the two of them act against each other. It's so fun knowing that they're mother and daughter in real life. But Neville comes in, and Jackie eventually convinces him to let her do this, and she says, "Look, your job's not very safe either. You're at the zoo now, with these dangerous lions and tigers and whatnot. And I don't know, what's going to happen to you either." So, look, it wasn't a bad point, to be honest. But again, there is an age difference there. He is, I don't know, probably 15 years younger than her, and so maybe a little more spry if something were to happen. If I don't know, the lion were to charge him or something. And look, they're all in cages. So it's not like we hear all the time about zookeepers, being mauled or whatever. Whereas, danger, for the cops. Yeah, we do hear about that a lot. So makes sense. But that, I'm sure is not the end of this plot, because I think in the coming weeks, she should hopefully start doing training or whatever, and we can see what that's like as the audience. So, all right, let's move on to the second part of the plot, Accusations. So this has to do with what we've been talking about this whole season, which is suing the opioid companies for Roseanne's death. And so in the intro, Dan is having Becky and Darlene help him with some of the files that he has to fill out, and the forms and whatever. And it sort of slips out, I guess, that Becky feels like Dan is kind of responsible, because something, it gets revealed. Dan says, "Oh yeah, I knew she was doing the pills, but she said she was better." And then I guess her, neighbors and friends were helping her with the pills, and the doctor never said no to her because she, kept complaining of the pain. And Becky sort of made a little comment at that point, that it wasn't exactly like, "Hey, this is your fault," but Dan took notice. And then a little bit later in the episode, she comes in, presumably to do some work or something, get out of the house. We've talked about that before as a plot point. And Dan is there, and he says, "Look, I'm going to regret asking this, but what did you mean with that comment?" And she basically says, "Look, I feel like you could have done something. I feel like you might be responsible for Mom's death." I mean, my God, that's opening up a whole can of worms. And then he kind of shoots right back at her and says, "Well, how would you know? You were a drunk at the time." Which, again, these are good points. The arguments that people are making, I could see both sides of all of these arguments in this episode. But later on in the episode, we get closure on this story, because Becky comes in and says, "Look, I just came from a meeting, and I need to make amends for a couple things. They she does a joke about how she tried to dribble Dan's bowling ball in the driveway when she was 10. Hey, never copped up to that. Sorry about that. But her real amends was, the addiction, and saying, look, I realize that there is nothing you could have done. Addiction is addiction, and look, 12-step programs obviously are great for things like that. And yeah, so she came out with it, and he in turn apologized to her and said, look, none of this was your fault either. I shouldn't have said that. There's nothing any of us could have done. And look, I think that for the most part is true. Especially, look, we know as the audience that Roseanne was hiding this pill addiction. She told Dan that it was done, and maybe he saw some signs. Maybe he looked away from some signs because he didn't want to believe it, and he wanted to believe his wife of 40 some years. But that certainly happens in the real world all the time. So I like that they touched on that. And I like that they touched, and again, to bring up the comment section on my video, somebody had mentioned last week or the week before, hey, whatever happened to, Becky's addiction? They don't talk about it anymore. Da, 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 da. Well, look, it doesn't need to be a major plot point at this time. I mean, we know that she went through that. We spent a whole, season and a half really with, her going to rehab and, all of that stuff and admitting the problem. And so we already sort of dealt with that. But I do like that it gets brought up every now and then. Like, I think it was last season, they were doing like a drinking game, and they made it clear to us, the audience, that she was drinking, juice or something. I forget. But certainly it was non-alcoholic for the drinking game. And so, yeah, there's little flourishes that remind us that she is still going to meetings. She's still on the wagon and all of that. So it's good that they had that out. And I'm glad that they sort of closed that argument in this episode, because I don't think that's something we need to dwell on. And at the end of it, they decide to go to Roseanne's grave together and make amends to her for not seeing the signs more or whatever. Dan makes a joke about, can we go at night? I like to steal some of the flowers from the rich people. All right, and then speaking of stealing, let's talk about our third plot line with Mark. So this was introduced in episode 1, dropped completely last week because Mark was not in the episode. Ames McNamara. The actor is in college now, so he is going back and forth between college and LA to film the show, and that's why he's not in every episode. One of my commenters let us know about that, so thank you for that. But a man bag is the portion of the title that leads us into this. So Darlene is trying to make plans with Mark. Hey, can I come see you at work? I can take you to dinner or whatever. He's like, no, it's our busy season. I got too much to do. Now, we as the audience know he's been illegally hacking, and that is how he's, making this money to pay for college. She doesn't know that yet, but she sees this very expensive, was it a Valencia bag? Some kind of man bag, man purse, man tote, whatever. And she has some issues with that and takes them to Neville, which is an interesting choice, but look, he's here this week, so why not? And says, hey, look, what do you think of this? I'm a little nervous about this. What does this mean? Where's he getting the money for this? And they come up with the idea that maybe he's got a sugar daddy, good looking, young gay kid, and why not pay for college through that? And Darlene kind of freaks out about it, confronts Mark. I hope I didn't say Ben earlier, but Mark, and says, hey, look, where did you get this bag? What's going on? What's this guy's name? What's the sugar daddy's name? He's like, no, that's not what's happening. Don't worry about it, whatever. And then she says, oh, I keep getting these texts from Aunt Jackie. And then Mark says, oh, she didn't even give me a week. Okay, now, personally, I don't know that I would have jumped to that conclusion until Darlene said something more explicit than just, oh, Jackie's been texting me. But Jackie basically gave him the ultimatum that he tells his mom what's going on or she will. So he says, okay, here's what's going on. I'm illegally hacking. Da, 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 da. So she gives him an ultimatum and says, well, Mark, look, either you stop doing this, and he says, or else, what? And she says, you can't live here. Which, look, that has got to be very tough for a parent to try and navigate, knowing that your kid is doing something not right, and what do you do about that? He's doing it for a good reason, we could say. He's trying to pay for college, and he claims that he'll stop when he pays for college. But in the meantime, he's going to keep doing it. He needs to pay for college. She points out, well, if you go to jail, you're not going to be going to college at all, and this and that, and your life will be over. So, some interesting points there as well. Again, an argument I can kind of see both sides of. Not that hacking's great, I guess, but um, there are certainly worse ways to make money. He's not running drugs and stuff like that. So I don't know. Obviously, Mark's education is very important to him and obviously the family, but Darlene knows she can't pay for it. Whatever happened, though, I guess you guys will have to remind me in the comments because you're sharper on this stuff than I am sometimes. I thought the whole point of Darlene working at the school was to pay for his schooling. Was that just his high school or something? And now I'm mixing up my seasons and everything. You guys let me know in the comments. There have been over 100 episodes of this show, and I'll be honest, I don't think I've rewatched any of them. I know it's in syndication now. I know it's on Netflix now, but this is the kind of show that I feel like I would wait until the whole show is wrapped up, and then I'll go back and watch everything. So I forget. So please let me know in the comments where I'm sort of getting my wires crossed, because I thought that she was able to pay for college by working at the cafeteria. But again, maybe I'm misremembering. And then she got him a job at one point on the janitorial staff, or he got the job. I forget, but whatever. Did those plot points fall by the wayside? I don't remember, but you'll remember and let me know in the comments. All right. So anyway, that was the episode this week. I didn't get a ton of laughs out of it like last week, but I will admit it brought up some interesting topics and arguments that, like I said, on all three counts, I kind of agreed with. I sort of see where both sides are coming from, which is interesting. Usually I'm like, oh yeah, this person's way in the right, this person's out of line. I don't know that I feel that way about any of these this week, and that's a good thing. I think that's a really strong case for the writing in this episode. So let's break it down with the MVP and my grade for this episode. Boy, I don't know. I mean, I think everybody's got some shining moments here, but I'm going to give the MVP to Lacey Goranson's Becky. I think her being able to admit, her mistake in blaming her father, which is an awful thing to do. I think that her showcasing that she's still going to AA. And there was a cute little tag scene at the end with her and Neville, where they realize they don't ever get to talk. He comes to the lunchbox to order something, and they decide that after a moment of awkward silence, maybe he can wait in his car and she'll bring it out. She'll have the busboy bring it out to him. So she had, I think, the best moments in this episode. And yeah, so I will give MVP to Becky. For a grade, look, I still don't think this is a great episode. I'm waiting for something in season 7 that really wows me. But I think it's slightly better than last week's because of the plots. Again, not as many laughs as I would like, certainly. I will leave this one Applications, Accusations, and a Man Bag with a B. All right, there's only 3 more left, so I will be with you week by week to go over all of those right here on the channel. But please check out my other videos in the meantime, and check out all my Connor stuff if you haven't already, and the Roseanne stuff from back in the day. But all right, thank you for watching Dan Reviews It. I'll see you next time.